D4D. I'm Nick Colley. Today is a special day. We've got some amazing people from the community who help run the election transparency group. On the line, we've got Chris and Scott. Hello, gentlemen.
Hey, how's it going, Nick?
Hi.
Doing very well. How about you guys?
Doing great.
Good.
Excellent. So as normal, if you are just tuning in, feel free to ask questions either on the Slack channel and or on the YouTube. We're going to be watching it. Tonight, we wanted to kind of give election transparency some time to talk about their project, what's going on, the side projects that have spun off from this main group, as well as some of the cool deliverables that they've been talking about in their blog series that's been going on actively. So with that, Chris and Scott, a little bit of introductions, who you are, a little bit of background, and how did you get involved with D4D?
Yeah, sure. I can go ahead and start. My name is Chris. I'm a data scientist at JD Power and spent a little time, about 7 years, working at the Census Bureau and at Citizenship and Immigration Services before moving into the private sector. My background, I'm sure like a lot of people in D4D, is I'm actually I was a graduate student in social science before I moved into government and private sector. And, after the election, I read Jonathan's blog post on Medium, was super interested, so signed up for the Slack channel, and it's all history from there.
I guess I'll introduce myself here. Scott Kame. I actually run a one-person consulting firm as of about May 1st, focused on data science. Before that, for a little more than 10 years, worked for a justice-focused nonprofit, doing some data science stuff and other things, and had some time in state and federal government even before that, further back in my career. My story about getting involved in D4D is actually much the same as Chris's. Sorry, I had a little audio issue there, but anyway, similar to Chris, just very interested in doing something and getting involved somehow, putting my skills to use after the somewhat surprising and interesting results of the election in November. And so it was great that there was actually a bit of an election transparency effort going on when I joined. So I just sort of jumped right into that and helped with pulling some data sets together. Okay.
So when you guys say election transparency, what does that mean? Because that kind of tends to be a very loaded term nowadays. How is this team defining that, and what's the goal of election transparency?
Well, I think, it's one of those things that's changed a little bit over time. I think when all of us started, right, in December, January, going into February, a lot of us were just kind of interested in understanding what happened in particularly the presidential election in November. There was a lot of focus on, could we find some anomalies in the voting patterns? Was there something going on there? I think over time, what we really found out was we really wanted to look at why did this anomalous outcome happen? Everyone expected the election to go the other way, and we just wanted to look at more kind of, why we were all surprised. So yeah, it is a bit of a loaded term, but I think more than anything, we're just trying to collect data and create models to try to explain the outcomes that we're seeing. Does that kind of jive with what you think as well, Scott?
Yeah, I would just add, everybody says that data science is 80% of the work that people don't like to do, munging and cleaning data, and 20% the work that everybody likes to do, visualization and modeling. I actually, maybe it's kind of a weird sickness I have or something, but that's actually flipped for me. I actually really enjoy pulling together and cleaning data. And when I joined the project right around the first of the year, that was still kind of our need. We had a desire to do the modeling and visualization stuff, but we didn't really have one data set yet that we could all use and base that work off of. So I spent a lot of time parsing through states' voter registration information at the county level. We got a big head start on the election results information from a data set that a researcher at Harvard, I believe it was Harvard, put together. Although even that for a couple of states needed further refinement because it wasn't at the county level. And then with Chris's help from his census background, pulling together a county level explanatory variables data set that had just about everything we could think of from census and other data sources, getting explanatory variables at the county level. So that was kind of the fun part of it for me, although I've done a little bit of visualization and modeling since too.
Oh, we can't hear you, Nick.
Oh, there we go. Sorry. So thanks. So you both mentioned how there was this giant surprise for a lot of the analysis done before the election of how things kind of churned. With the data you have collected, it sounds like you got data all the way down to the county level. What has there been some lessons learned from this?
Well, let's actually go ahead and start with just kind of giving people an idea of the data that we did collect, because yeah, most of it is at the county level, but we did also collect some data at the congressional district level, and we'll also talk about a couple projects that have spun off that are actually collecting data at different levels as well. But I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here for a second and just kind of point out on data.world where we have all of our data. So you'll see, for those of you that aren't familiar with data.world, it's a place where a lot of Data for Democracy teams are storing their data. And we have our own repository on here, election transparency, super easy to find. It's under Data for Democracy and then election transparency. And we have a bunch of different data sets on here. This first one, I guess, kind of confusing. This is actually what Scott was talking about, where we're taking some of the borough mappings from Alaska, because they actually report their results in precincts and they don't fully overlap with the boroughs of Alaska, which is Alaska's counties. We have a bunch of data sets in here, but I just want to point out that we have demographics, we have more demographics. We actually have House election results on here as well for 1980 to 2014. So this is one of those situations where we're actually looking at the congressional district level, and we're not even looking at the presidential elections here. We're looking at the House elections. We also have party registration data. This is something that we're actually still looking to update and bring more data in on. And then we have presidential election tables for 92, 96, 2000, 2004, 2008, 12, and 2016. And some really cool stuff has been done with this. I just want to show real quick a Shiny app that one of the people working on our project, Robert, actually created. And this is using all of those data. I'm showing the state of Washington because Scott and I were actually talking about this right before we started. We both have lived in the state of Washington. I think Scott still does. But it's really cool, you know. I mean, you can look right here, 2016, Trump and Clinton. State of Washington, you can actually click on Clark County, where I grew up. And Scott was just telling me this was the 5th closest county in the country. Clinton only won by 300 votes. You know, we have Seattle, not nearly as close. And where I went to college over here, where Pullman, Washington is, much lower vote totals, but Clinton won by about 700 votes. So it's this great stuff. You know, it goes all the way back to 2000. So you can compare how, you know, what did Bush Kerry look like in Washington? Romney, Obama. So it's really, it's great stuff, and all 50 states are in there. So I definitely encourage people to check this out. Although Robert may not be too happy with me if that makes him pay more for his Shiny app account. So maybe ask him before you do that. All right. So I just wanted to show a couple of those before we started talking too much about the modeling results, which I know Scott wants to talk a little bit about, and how we learned about some of the reasons maybe for the surprises in the fall.
Definitely. Go ahead, Scott.
All right. Well, let me see if I can share my screen here real quick. Okay. All right, so you should be seeing, let's see if I can blow this up a little, a browser window here.
Yep.
Is that coming across for you guys?
Coming loud.
Yep.
Coming loud.
Okay, great. So this is a notebook, and we can, I guess, post the URL for this notebook into the Slack channel, or make it available on YouTube. It's a little bit lengthy to read off there, but we have a number of notebooks out in our in the GitHub repository for election transparency that various contributors, participants have created. This is one that I did, setting out to just do a simple linear regression model of where the dependent variable, the left-hand side variable, is the percentage of the Democrat-Republican vote that Trump won in 2016. So it's the Republican percentage of the two-party vote, and regressing that on a number of variables that that we collected in the data sets that Chris was just showing off of data.world. So all this is available out of data.world, the input data that is. And this is a little bit of, I guess, p-hacking, you'd call it. We sort of went through and tried various combinations of the variables we had to see how close we could get to, or to see how high we could get the R-squared, basically, to see how much of the variance in that Trump percentage of the two-party vote we could explain. And we actually did fairly well. We got the R-squared up to 0.83, which is, you know, fairly good. Certainly don't recommend this as a general strategy for kind of doing data science, you know, just sort of throwing variables in to see how much of the variance you can explain. Typically that's not a good thing to do. But for our particular purposes here, we were just trying to see which combination of variables really had the most impact on the variance. As you can see here, this is our output. But the 3 stars here indicates significance to the you know, 0.001 significance level. So all these variables that we've included here are significant, but it kind of gives you a sense of the explanatory variables we were able to collect. There are some census variables in here like education, race, citizenship. We have some on housing costs and household income. We have some things like from the Commerce Department, like labor force participation rate, unemployment rate. We created a Simpson diversity index, which is sort of a measure of whether and this is based on racial diversity, whether the dispersion in the percentage of each race in the population is more equal or unequal. We pulled in a data set of religious adherence, which is available at the county level and not only captures overall religious adherence, but actually aggregates censuses from various religious denominations as to the sort of number of adherents they have in each county. So we pulled in several of those. We also included some geographic sort of indicator variables. We had a hypothesis that just being on the Texas border, despite the demographic differences and so forth in those counties, had its own effect based on one of Trump's signature campaign promises to build a wall there. So basically the results here, you can sort of see the coefficients or the signs on the coefficients. They sort of have in most cases, the signs that you would expect. You know, Trump won the white vote. That's sort of well understood. So as you would expect, the sign on the white variable, the white race variable is positive. Trump also did not fare very well in the Hispanic population. So that's indicated here with a negative sign. And so forth. He lost the college-educated vote. One interesting variable we included, given the debate that's going on right now, is how large the population is in each county that does not have health insurance. And this variable here, uninsured, captures that. So interestingly, there's a positive effect on the percentage of vote in a county that Trump won with the number of uninsured folks in that county. So make of that what you will, but that's what the data shows. So certainly not going to go through all this. You can sort of dig into the notebook if you're interested. Let me just wrap up here though with one thing we did, two analyses that we spun off of this. I was really interested in looking at any patterns of how well this model fit at the county level. So this choropleth here takes the residual from the fitted value to the actual value in each county and plots it with red being Trump overperformance in that county and blue being a Clinton overperformance in that county. So this map is not indicating who won that county. It's indicating, based on what our model would predict, did it under predict or over predict a particular candidate's performance. So, you know, Chris was just talking about Washington. There's something about sort of the West Coast geographic area that our model's not really accurately capturing because Clinton overperformed in sort of the coastal counties. Similarly, in the upper Midwest, there was a lot of Clinton overperformance. And then in sort of the Great Plains states, there was a significant Trump overperformance, and also sort of in the exurbs of New York City and Philadelphia. So we really haven't dug into this too much on the channel, but we thought that was interesting. And then finally, we did an analysis of those counties that were sort of the worst and best performing in terms of our model and aggregated that at the state level. And the model accurately predicts the winner of each state except for these 5. And we really don't quite have an explanation for this yet. We did discuss it on the channel a bit, and there's currently an effort underway to do a nonlinear model, probably using random forests on this data set to see if it could predict the state winners better.
Interesting. So
yeah, sorry, Nick. One thing that I will note, and I think this is key, is that all of these data are here. So if you see something in kind of the modeling that Scott's done or other people have done, and you think, oh man, that's super interesting, I have some ideas to go off of this, that's definitely a place that you can you know, use some of your time.
No, that's really interesting, the findings. So how did you go about and determine some of these features? You know, some of it looked like the Texas one was a theory you had. Was there any concern with overfitting with particular features? How did you pull some of these features out?
Well, I'll offer my thoughts on that, and then Chris, you can as well. There was a bit of discussion in the channel, sort of back and forth, which factors did we think would be the most important to include. Some of it was based on, this was sort of a notebook that I created, it was based on just kind of my thinking about, you know, just observing the news and the pundits' discussion of the election and that. What were the factors that people were you know, sort of raising most often, and some of them are just kind of obvious things to me that you would want to include. Chris, any further thoughts?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's totally true. You know, I agree with a lot of the reasons why we came up with our theories. I think some of those variables are always controlled for in these types of analyses, and some of the others were just kind of theories that came up through our discussion of kind of what seemed different about the rhetoric around this campaign. As for overfitting, I mean, yeah, I think that would be an issue if we were, you know, trying to predict what's going to happen in the next campaign, for sure. But I think in this one, kind of what we're trying to do with this model, and Scott, correct me if I'm wrong, because again, you were the one who did this work. But really our focus here was trying to kind of boost the signal on what was different and throwing a bunch of different variables at that and trying to really explain as much of the variance as we could. It's almost a situation where we wanted to overfit, if that makes sense, because we had this idea that it was different than other elections.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say. As I mentioned when I introduced this, we were trying to get a model that fit as tightly as we possibly could. I was just looking at one thing here. The model correctly predicts the winner in 2,928 of the 3,110 counties. So I don't know what that percentage is, but it's definitely very tightly fitted. So I would not claim at all that this would predict the 2020 election or really have anything to say about any future election. It was really just about trying to measure the factors that influence this one.
No, it's very interesting. So if we were able to go back in time and talk to the news outlets that were doing a lot of these early predictions, would you provide them any advice, or do you have any advice for them to help them get their models a little bit more accurate than what we saw?
Well, I think one thing I would say to that is, I mean, it would have been really tough. It's kind of a hindsight is 2020 type issue. You know, I think it was very, very tough to make a call on these elections. I think that there were some people that were kind of trending in a less sure of themselves mode in the last 2 weeks before the election. But I mean, I think it's really tough to actually get polls right and to get, you know, I'm by no means a political expert, and I think we have people in D4D that could actually speak to this much more intelligently than me. But I think that there's a lot to be said for it's very hard to get the right mix of people in polls. And it's also, you know, there's a lot of other issues going on with that as well. Not going to be one of those people that says throw away polling, because I think that's silly. But I think that we need to be careful in how we interpret things and really question our assumptions at all times. So I think that's what I would be telling people, is always question your assumptions. Any thoughts on that, Scott?
Well, you know, it's the discussions of this since the election, almost all of them point out that Clinton actually performed within what 0.7% of what the national polls said she would. And the election was really decided by what, fewer than 80,000 votes in 3 states. And you're not going to pick up that kind of, you're not going to be able to predict that outcomes at that level of detail with polling. It's just not possible. And so I actually think polling did remarkably well.
No, this is really fascinating. Have y'all looked at potentially analyzing to see if county population plays an effect or could be a potential feature to how or what could throw a vote one way or another? Because if you look at a lot of the post-result maps, a lot of the Democratic counties were heavily populated cities. New York City, Florida, you know, a lot of the big cities there, Portland, Oregon, so forth, Charlotte, North Carolina, Raleigh, Durham. I can list them all. Is that something that y'all have looked at, or is that, and we're like, no, that doesn't apply, or something that could be potential?
Correct me if I'm wrong, Scott. I think some people, I'm not sure if it was in your model because I missed when you were presenting it there, but I think some people did use a measure of rural urban in their analyses. And I mean, I think it tends to have a effect that you would expect.
We did include it in some versions, but it isn't in the one that I showed here. And I think that's largely because it is highly correlated with the other variables that we've included in the regression.
Absolutely.
So, you know, you throw it in there with education, with housing costs, with, in some cases, racial breakdown, et cetera. That urban-rural measure washes out.
Okay, cool. So election transparency, Scott, you kind of mentioned that once the ball started moving, that there was some other initiatives that came out about it. Can both of y'all kind of walk through what some of those spin-offs are, what the goals of those are? And
I think a great one to start with, and I'll let you talk a little bit about this one, Scott, because I know you have a few things pulled up about it, is one that actually started long before, well, I don't know about long, but a good time before Data for Democracy, and that's open elections.
Yeah, let me just, well, yeah, so there's a channel on Slack called Open Elections that Derek Willis and some other folks started. And if you're interested in supporting the open elections effort, there is a lot of work to be done there, almost an endless amount, I think you could say. But essentially what they do is collect raw voter results, and I think maybe in some cases registration information, although I could be wrong about that, from whatever source they can get them from. Usually it's Secretary of State or whoever the chief election official is in each state. In some cases they've gone to the county level, and these source artifacts are everything from handwritten, scanned PDF documents where precinct folks in the counties have handwritten in the vote totals in those counties, all the way to Excel spreadsheets or CSV files. And the open election effort, as Chris said, has been around for quite some time, certainly predates D4D. They have a kind of a pipeline process set up where, and it's all in Python, I believe it's all in Python, but you just sort of figure out wherever there's a need and wherever you can contribute in that pipeline, they welcome those contributions. Let me just share my screen here again.
Yeah, as you're doing that, I can note a few more things. I do know that one of the biggest needs that they have is just simply parsing data. And I mean, the really great thing about open elections is they're looking for only certified elections results. So there are other people who've thrown together some, you know, even district level election data sets. Now they're all the way down at the precinct level, so that's obviously even better. But sometimes people will use not final official election results, and there can be some slight differences between those two. But one thing that I will note, most of their pipeline is in Python. However, when it comes to actually just parsing raw data into something that's then readable by the rest of their pipeline, they're fine with people. I think in some cases they have to hand code things. In some cases, you know, they've been open to people using R as well as Python. So they definitely they have both.
Right, good deal. So I asked Derek actually to put together, or if he could provide us with a list of kind of where they're at with 2016 results, because that's these days what a lot of people are interested in looking at. And so I've filtered the spreadsheet that he's posted at this link, and again, we can provide that, or you can join the Open Elections channel and ask, and I'm sure Derek will post the link there. But these are the states, and let's see, I'm not sure it's telling me how many there are, but over half of them are either states that have already been converted, so there's already a precinct level file in Open Elections that's available for that state. And I also filtered here to show the ones where states where they need a volunteer. So if you're interested in this is a good opportunity to get involved. But what's nice about precinct level files is it gives you a much larger end to work with in terms of modeling. So you can take that percentage that I just used and showed in the notebook that I built, and you can explode the N up to what, 100 times of what it is at the county level. And you can through the American Community Survey product from the Census Bureau, you can get voting precinct level information for a lot of the census variables. So you can actually run similar models with a much finer grained level of observation. But again, many states have already been converted. So if this is a place where you live or a place where you have a particular interest, or particularly interesting swing states like Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Ohio have been converted. So there's a great opportunity there for digging in. And the open elections channel in D4D Slack is kind of the bridge between these efforts and these organizations. So if you're interested in helping that connection, go join that channel and dig in.
Definitely.
So you're looking for people with Python or just data munging skills, being able to convert the data and to model it to get the results. Is there already a defined model, or are you looking for model builders as well?
Well, for open elections, they're really just trying to, the whole goal is to make these precinct level data open to the public in a free and easy to obtain format. So there's really no modeling on that. Now, you can dig into the data and build models like Scott was talking about. And that's something that I think in the election transparency channel, I think we would be super interested in people really digging into. Really any, kind of overall, anything that's going to shed light on how elections work in our country in a more full way, I think is fantastic. So nothing defined yet, but we'd love to see someone interested in doing it.
Excellent. So you have the open elections group that spawned off. There's also the UK elections group that spawned off from this, as well as PJS Politics and Gerrymandering. What are those initiatives going? What are those groups doing or trying to aim to achieve? Yeah,
so I can speak a little bit to the gerrymandering one, and that's for people who don't know, gerrymandering is basically the idea that in many states it's a partisan group that actually draws the legislative boundaries, both your congressional districts as well as your House legislative districts, or your state legislative districts. Sorry, and the thought is that people can actually kind of game the system and draw boundaries for their own political gain. We've seen this in a lot of different states, some on both sides of the aisle, but I think a lot of people have said that the 2010 redrawing of boundaries in a lot of states where the Republicans actually gained the majority in the state legislatures or got the governorships, saw some pretty rough gerrymanders, and a lot of those cases are going through the courts right now. Looks like Scott's pulling something up here. You want to talk through that a little bit? North Carolina.
You showed my home state there, Scott. Of course.
This is the poster child for gerrymandering. This is the 12th congressional district in North Carolina. So it goes all the way.
Legit.
Pretty much crosses the state north to south.
It's the most legit district ever. Come on now.
Now, one of the things that came out of this was, I think we just started kind of in the channel talking about, okay, we've done a lot of this presidential stuff. We're collecting some data on the House. A lot of us are really interested in gerrymandering. Where can we help? And the first thing that came up was we had a good number of political scientists in the channel, and they just pointed us to a lot of the research that's already been done. And I think a lot of us said, wow, there's no reason for us to reinvent that wheel. Let's see if there's groups that are already working on some of this stuff where we can, kind of help them out with some skilled data science workers. And I happened to stumble into Sam Wang's work up at Princeton, where he has I'm going to do a screen share here real quick as well, Scott. And he actually has this website, which is really focused on helping out lawyers and judges to understand if a district or a whole state was actually gerrymandered or not. Ooh. He has a couple simple tests in here, couple simple statistical tests. I'm definitely not the right person to talk about exactly what his tests are, but I'm sure we could get him to talk to the group at some point if we're interested. Yes. Basically what we did is I talked to Sam and said, hey, it looks like your beta site here, it looks like it's something that you may want to update as you know, some of these Supreme Court cases are potentially coming up. Is that something we could help you with? So actually, we have a separate group that's kind of actually had to split off from D4D because a couple other groups started working with it as well. So we have a separate kind of Slack channel where a group is helping Professor Wang to actually update this page and make it more useful for lawyers and judges.
That's really fascinating.
And people are just these days seem to be super interested in gerrymandering. I mean, it's become a really big issue. You know, Obama hired Holder to head that redistricting effort for 2020. And, you know, I'm seeing a lot of groups having like meetups and hackathons about redistricting these days. So it's a big issue, and I think it's a place that people can really have an impact.
Awesome. What about the Just Politics? What's the goal of Just Politics?
I don't know if Jonathan might be on. He sort of started this up, but in case he's not, I'll just give the brief spiel on it. Essentially, it's trying to identify the most vulnerable districts on either side. So sort of those potential swing or flip districts that are currently held by Republicans that could easily flip to a Democrat winning in 2018, or vice versa, currently held by a Democrat and could easily flip to a Republican winning. It's been a little while since I've seen much activity there, or new results coming out of it, I should say. But I'm sure folks are hard at work looking into those kinds of issues. So if that's of interest in sort of exploring, putting together a data set that could help answer that question. One interesting thing about that project that's going on is trying to collect or trying to put together a data set that collects sort of social media activity in each district, which has introduced some kind of interesting methodological questions. So, you know, how do you try to assign to, say, the 12th District of North Carolina social media activity there? You know, it doesn't really align with county boundaries or whatever. So trying to figure out, the team there is trying to figure out how to pull together that data set, and using some of the social media harvesting methodologies and technologies that have been developed elsewhere in D4D to try to pull that data set together and try and, you know, just try to measure, use social media as a way to measure kind of potential voter sentiment and the degree to which those districts might be vulnerable one way or the other.
Excellent. So kind of winding down a little bit, when y'all were starting to go through the data, we always hear in the news that the data is not accurate, or there may not be, or there'll be oddities in the data. Have y'all found anything weird or something that was just kind of like unexpected while y'all were going through and building your models on it?
I will say I've a couple of the data sets that I have up on election transparency, I took actually kind of from academic databases where they actually allow kind of some of the data some data sharing. And going back to actually some of the historical elections, I didn't actually notice this when I put it on there, but actually when people started working on the Just Politics project, someone noticed, hey, when I add these two columns together, I'm getting like 500% of the reported actual vote. What's going on? And I actually found, you know, a few errors in the academic database that they had, and was able to reach back out and tell them, you know, hey, you have a couple duplicate rows here that you didn't think were duplicates because you had some reported with someone had a middle initial in one report and didn't have a middle initial in the other report. And so you actually doubled their vote count, even though they lost twice with way more votes than the other person who actually won. So it was, you definitely find issues like that, and it just always reminds you how careful you have to be really in cleaning your data, even when you think you're pulling from a very clean data source.
Yeah, that's why, just to underscore the work that Open Elections is doing, why that effort is so important, because they are absolutely meticulous, first of all, in only sourcing their data from certified election results, where this kind of issue is occurs less frequently, I think. And they're also very diligent about checking and double checking and you know, running those kinds of totals and making sure there aren't those kinds of errors in those data sets. So you know, anything we can do to help Open Elections will prevent that kind of stuff from happening.
That is awesome. So you guys are also, Scott, you talked about some of the people, and Chris, some of the skill sets you're looking for, different groups. Is there any particular skill sets you're looking for election transparency, the main hub of this?
So I can start with just kind of one call, and that is we're always trying to continually, you know, collect more data, especially things like party registration. When states are, you know, reporting 3 or 4 times a year, we're still trying to pull some of those data. It's slowed down in the last few months, how much we're actually trying to pull the data, but we still have a lot of historical data to pull. And that's always an easy, I say easy in quotes, easy thing for, you know, a beginner to start with. If you're a little afraid of doing a little, you know, a lot of the modeling or the data visualization, and you want to just get your hands dirty with some of the messy data wrangling, you know, we have a lot of that going on. But I think there's a lot of modeling still to be done as well.
Yeah, I'd like to see how far we can take that. And so really any sort of data science skill set or any skill set of folks participating in D4D would be welcome. There's something for everybody to do. One thing I've been working on is pulling together a similar data set for the French election, the presidential election that occurred, when was it, in June? Well, I guess the first round was in May and the second round was in June. We have a data set out on data.world now of the results from both rounds of that election. I've also started working on parsing the French census. They don't quite have as rich of a census data set as we're spoiled with the ACS and some of the other data sets we have. But they do have many of the explanatory variables we tend to be interested in their census, which I think was done in 2015, so fairly recent. But anybody who's interested in exploring that, I know the UK folks also are pulling together a data set for their election. So lots of work to be done in pretty much any skill set.
Awesome. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. For the teams behind election transparency and all the subgroups that have spawned from that, thank you for all the amazing work you all have done. There's some great contributions, and we look forward to seeing a lot more greatness coming out. And feel free to come back on this channel and talk about your next findings. You're more than welcome to come back.
Great. Thanks for having us, Nick.
Thanks a lot, Nick.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Till next time, D4D. Have a good night.